So I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight into what I've been doing in the field of sustainable fashion and how that's going to kind of influence the future of technology. Because I guess today you've heard a lot about the technology side of the debate, and I want to kind of fill you in on sustainability, I guess, and how I think those two are going to interact. Because I think that this moment in time, specifically 5 p.m. on the 3rd of September 2015, is quite a special moment actually for the future of our planet and the future of fashion, because it's decisions that we are making today. So the decision you made this morning about what to wear, which is actually going to have a huge impact about the future of our planet and the future of the people on our planet as well. So yeah, not to make it seem scary or anything, but I think that technology and sustainability are both two huge influences on the future of fashion, and both of them are kind of unpredictable in a way. But I think sustainability in particular might be a little bit scary, because unless we kind of work towards solutions in the present time, maybe the effects of sustainability are going to be less in our control than maybe technology. So I hope today to fill you in a little bit about how I see the two interacting. So I'm going to give you some quick facts firstly, for those of you who maybe don't know much about the sustainability side, just to kind of tell you what I've experienced through sustainability, and some fast facts which maybe aren't so fun, but still important. So you may not know that fashion is the world's second most polluting industry, second only to oil. So there's a number of reasons for that, which I'm going to go into. And then secondly, fashion is actually the world's second biggest user of water, second only to agriculture. So if we break this down a little bit, when I talk about water, how many litres of water do you think it takes to make one t-shirt? Well, you might be surprised to hear it's 2,700. So that kind of factors in things from the cotton being grown, to then the dyeing treatment, to then the textile production, and obviously that leads to another effect, which is pollution. So if you've been hearing any news about the manufacturing conditions in China, you might have heard about all the pollution in their rivers. Water pollution is a huge issue for our planet, and fashion is one of the biggest causes of that kind of pollution. And obviously the use of water actually continues for us as end users, because it's often very easy to actually exclude ourselves from the process of, causing pollution. But actually, when we wash our clothes and care for our clothes, we're actually using a huge amount of energy and water. I mean, I don't know who hasn't reinvented the washing machine yet, but it uses a huge amount of energy and water for its size, and just through not knowing how to look after our clothes properly, we're causing a huge amount of pollution. And obviously textile waste is another huge issue. In the UK alone, we have about 1 million tons of textile waste a year. Take that to China, and it's about 20 million. Take it to other places of the world, and people aren't even brave enough to try and predict it yet. So it's another huge issue which technology could potentially be innovating on. Now, these are probably a scene that you're probably used to seeing on places like Oxford Street. So it's a phenomenon that has become known as fast fashion. So we're shopping more and more regularly, we're buying more and more items of clothing, and actually we're in the illusion that maybe we're spending less on our clothing, but actually the UK average spend on clothing has been increasing year upon year. Otherwise you probably all wouldn't be here today. But yeah, and so this kind of leads us to a huge environmental burden. So this is quite a famous environmental burden equation. So the environmental burden is increasing and being caused by the effects of population increase, which is the P. A for affluence, so increasing amounts of consumption, consumptionism, us all wanting to have more and more items and materialistic needs, times technology. So at the moment, technology is actually increasing the environmental burden. So if we want to go around decreasing the environmental burden, we could try and look at this equation. So we're obviously not going to be decreasing the population anytime soon, and we're not going to be wanting to decrease our levels of affluence. So if we make technology the denominator in this equation, you can actually see that technology is the key solution to reducing the environmental burden. And fashion actually has a huge amount to play in that, as you've heard today. So Oh, and then aside from the environmental challenges, we also have the social challenges in fashion, which are obviously very interlinked. So this is a scene from the Rana Plaza factory collapse in 2013. So 1,100 people, garment workers, died in this factory, which was not up to health and safety standards. It's one of the biggest industrial disasters of our recent times, and really demonstrates the huge amount of people who are employed in fashion supply chain. Not just garment workers, but even today in London, the huge amount of people who are working in the fashion industry, from marketing to sales to retail, is one of the world's biggest employers. And so fashion really has a huge role to play in social issues as well as environmental. So yeah, you're probably wondering who I am at this point and why I'm stood up here as a 22-year-old recent graduate who should be shopping in Zara and H&M, not worrying about, the consequences of the environment or social issues from what I'm buying in the shop floor. But I guess I've become quite dissatisfied because I've recently graduated from University of London. I've also been studying at Babson College and the University of Hong Kong. And I think it was that time in Hong Kong which really opened my eyes to how our shopping habits are actually affecting the rest of the world and the rest of the planet. So I became involved in an organisation called Redress. So they're an NGO working towards improving sustainability in Asia's fashion supply chain. So they do a number of activities, mostly around educating the fashion designer towards sustainable procurement practices or sustainable design practices. And now I've kind of spotted a huge gap, which I think I want to try and solve to launch my own business. So I'm in the New Entrepreneurs Foundation in London at the moment. Don't know if any of you are aware of it, but it's kind of like a 12-month training program to help us launch our own businesses. So yeah, last year I actually got involved in the research side of sustainable fashion, which is why on the program I'm called Sustainable Fashion Researcher, which is kind of mysterious. But so the title of my dissertation last year was Can wider social labeling of clothing help increase sustainable consumption? So I was kind of looking at how big fashion companies are trying to talk about the activities they're doing in terms of assessing their environmental impact or their social impact. And there's a huge amount of media attention now on the fashion companies asking what are they doing? And actually nobody's really worked out yet how to communicate to consumers in a fun way what they actually are doing to try and reduce their environmental footprint or their ethical production, and how can we find out about it? So a social label essentially means something like the Fair Trade logo, which I'm sure you're used to seeing more on like your bananas or your coffee or something like that, and not so much on clothing yet. But these other three labels are ones that you might see on your clothing, which is the Global Organic Textile Standard, Fair Wear Foundation, and Uecotex. I'm still not sure how to pronounce it, but they basically test for chemical substances in your clothing. So I basically went out to do some research to see how effective these labels were and whether there could be any potential growth for the future and how technology might be able to get involved in communicating environmental and social impacts of our clothing. So these are just some quick findings of what I found. And there was a huge difference, well, not a huge difference, but an interesting difference between the value that people placed on environmental factors compared to ethical factors. Because it's often seen that we might care more about who made our clothing because we can link to them as another human being, whereas we can less understand our impact on the planet because we're often so separated from nature and our planet. And so I tested the willingness to pay for a social label and whether consumers, if they saw a fair trade label on their clothing, would they want to pay more for it, or would they still just go for the Primark brand because it's cheaper? So it's quite interesting to see the difference in terms of people wanting to pay more for an environmentally friendly product, whereas if it was an ethically labeled product, they would only want to buy it if it was the same price. And there were key issues that came out about people not trusting the claims that big companies made or not understanding the information either. So I went out and spoke to some big fashion brands like Marks and Spencer's, not just a label, and asked them about how they saw the consumer looking at social labels and whether they thought they'd be an effective solution for allowing customers to buy more environmentally friendly clothing. So, and actually a key question that came to my mind, being of the younger generation myself, is how can we engage the younger generation? And I think this is where technology came to my mind. So, next slide. there's also other ways of labeling garments aside from just a physical label. Because at the moment, if you have a look at the label in your clothing, it's actually really bizarre how unenvironmental the process of labeling something with a piece of material which you're going to cut off is in itself, the wasted material which is used in that process. So there's other ways of labeling tags. This one is a QR code, which you're probably used to seeing on other products, not so much clothing. And so this is another company called Fashion Footprint who are currently developing this technology for customers to engage on the shop floor. Just scanning using their mobile phone to scan the QR code, they can access more information on the ethical impacts of their clothing. There's all kind of different avenues for growth, I guess, in sustainability in the fashion industry. So many challenges and at the same time so many opportunities. So I don't know if any of you participated in Fashion Revolution Day this year, which was to mark the 3rd anniversary of the Rana Plaza garment factory collapse. So the aim of this day is that everybody wears their clothes inside out, and then you're meant to be showing off your labels instead of hiding them, and showing off, where your clothes were made, or asking the question of who made your clothes. So I tried to take this one step further by getting everybody to cut off their labels, and so arranged this one day when everybody would come and stick their labels on a huge wall, creating like an artistic installation. Got quite a lot of media attention, and the aim was to collect 1,100 labels, the same number of people who died at Rana Plaza. So it was a really interesting activity, because when people initially saw their labels saying made in China, they realized how little it actually meant. It doesn't really mean anything, because China is such a huge country, and how can you ever, those 3 words mean anything in terms of how it was made or the environmental techniques used. I think Christina was going to kind of pose a few questions to me as kind of like an interview format, but as well I'd love to answer any of your questions about sustainability or how technology is going to play a role. And yeah, I'd really love to hear your opinion as well on what you think the industry should be doing for sustainability.
Does anyone have any questions?
Well, I was sort of just thinking more about going back to like the labelling and thinking about fair trade and thinking about how people label their products. And there's that real problem, isn't there, between this fashion revolution and how the brands and the mass market kind of abuse that a bit in that whole kind of greenwashing way.
Yeah.
And how you stop, like at the moment, you can sew the buttons on a cardigan in Italy and claim that it's made in Italy. And how do you stop things for the good, like fair trade, being abused in the same way, and the same as your app, until there's kind of government regulation. I find things like this could easily be, taken on just for a bit of CSR.
Yeah, no, that's a common perception that, when customers see things like made in Italy or something, they're like, oh, that's just a gimmick, or, it's just them trying to do their part. But actually there are already regulations about, what you can say when you say it's made in Italy or made in China, because when it says made in China, that means the majority of the manufacturing process has taken place in China. So you can't really just claim that something's made in Italy if the majority of the manufacturing process hasn't been done there. Yeah, it is quite a fine line, because, a garment that says made in China could have, the cotton could have been grown in Africa, and then, we're such a global supply chain at the same time that how could you ever try and govern that unless there was like a global organization to come in and say, we're going to govern it? Because, you could sell, Zara, for example, sells one garment in the UK, the same garment in Spain, the same garment in China. So the government regulations would then vary as well. So I think it really comes down to the private sector to try and regulate this environment and create some kind of standard. Because at the moment there's people doing so many different types of things that nobody knows what's right or what's wrong, or actually, it's a very confusing environment at the moment, and at the moment no one's actually sure where it's going or what the right solution is. So it's a bit of experimentation, I guess.
Hi there. I think you're very brave. How do you foresee yourself? I mean, there's lots of issues here, because one is what people say they will do and what they actually do is shown to be very different in terms of purchasing. But I was just intrigued by how do you see getting the data to populate these, your app, or will you just be dependent on the brands?
Yeah, well, that's another good question, because collecting the data is in itself a bit of an issue, which there's already so many other organisations out there who are actually doing quite a good job at this. So String 3, for example, is quite a new development in London. And then outside of, I think the fashion industry is learning a lot of these data collection techniques from other industries, like food, for example, where I've already, got a lot of techniques in terms of gathering data but even that is still in development. But
Yeah, I think that String working with M&S was actually, they tried it, but they couldn't actually make it work. What I'm just trying to say is it's hugely complicated. There aren't that many life cycle analysis of garments, and it's very expensive to do. But I was just interested. I mean, maybe we'll talk afterwards.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because I think the thing is that the data is so complex that I don't think there's any way, even if I did find out all the data on one T-shirt, that I would be able to present it to the customer in a friendly and fun way. So at the moment, I'm not focusing too much on getting every single piece of data, but focusing on 2 specific areas of environment and 2 specific areas of people. So I can focus on those at the moment, and as more data becomes available, we can then provide more.